evoked by magicians, feared spirits of evil, exorcised by the Catholic Church, even metaphors for inner problems, psychological issues. What are actually these demons? Where do they come from? And can they actually really be controlled for magical purposes? Hello everyone, this is Rod and welcome back to Academia Magica. And today we will be talking about demons. Now, the definition of demon or daimon assumed very different connotation and meaning depending on the time and culture from the Sumerian time, Egyptians, Zoroastrian, Greek, Roman, Middle Age, and all the way to our time. So actually this connotation and meaning would be just a discussion on itself. So for this video, I will just be focusing mainly on the demons slash spirits that we commonly find, for example, in the Solomonic tradition, or what they are so-called quote-unquote infernal spirits. Before going further, I believe the first question would be if they actually exist. Well, beyond my personal experience, I would like here to mention a sentence that I read from Alan Moore. Alan Moore, the latest book, I think is one of the latest that he published. It's a beautiful book. It's called The Moon and the Serpent Bumper, Book of Magic. And he writes there, with reference to God, he writes, whether the God exists in a conventional sense is quite simply not an issue. The idea of God unquestionably exists. So basically we can say the same thing about the demons. So whether they exist or not exist is not actually the issue. The issue is that the idea of these demons exist. So that would be probably enough to make them real. Again, Aleister Crowley defined, for example, the spirits listed in the art Goetia as portions of the human brain, suggesting psychological experience. But then again, this kind of approach was very common during the late 1800, early 1900, to try to associate, to try to connect magic and psychology. And this could also be metaphysically true from a Kabbalistic point of view. As, for example, Lon Milo Duquette would put it, it is all in your head. You just have no idea how big your head is. So here again, a strong connection to the Kabbalistic approach. An approach that, by the way, it could be well endorsed within the quantum physics, where in very simple terms we can say that consciousness creates reality. The famous sentence of Einstein's when he says, "Is the moon still there if nobody is looking?" So anyway, going beyond whether the spirits are phenomenal, so they exist because of us, or they're nominal, so they exist independently of our consciousness, our presence, let's see where they actually historically come from. And here I think we have two major different categories of spirits. We have evil spirit that have always been known and classified as evil. And then we have another part, which are actually ancient gods that have been demonized by the winning religion. Like, for example, when the religion change, when the winner take over, the pre-existing gods will be demonized by the new religion. Other, of course, there can be other categories which are minor. For example, it could be deceased, spirit of deceased, egregores, elementals, but mainly, of course, we will focus on these two main categories. So spirit that have been always known to be evil, and gods that have been demonized. So for the evil spirits, we go all the way back to the Sumerian time. These spirits later will influence the Assyrian, the Babylonian, Judaism, Christianity, so even all the way to our days. So among the Sumerians, these spirits were clearly associated with diseases, bad weather, so directly connected to something negative beyond, recognized by everybody, beyond any kind of religious or theological interpretation. So, for instance, among these spirits, we find Nergal, who was the lord of the underground, leading legions of demons related to bringing diseases to humans. We find Namtaru, the bringer of plague, Ashaku for other diseases. We find Lamashtu, a demon that was targeting pregnant women, causing abortions. We also find the famous demon Pazuzu, the one that most of you may remember from the movie The Exorcist. So this Pazuzu was known actually as the king of the wind. Further, we find the goddess Ishtar, who seemed to have a demonic servant called Lilitu, and several other entities targeting especially single men and newborn babies, like the demon Ardat Lili or Lilu, that these names became then later associated to the story of Lilith when it became transposed into the Jewish tradition. Interesting enough that we find also figurines of Pazuzu, or simply the head of Pazuzu, used as apotropaic amulets to protect actually pregnant women and young babies from the fury of Lamashtu. So it seems that Pazuzu was playing this kind of dual role. On one side it was a demon, but on the other side was also invoked or used as an amulet to protect from Lamashtu. Another famous name that we find is Asmodeus, most likely coming from Zoroastrianism. In fact, in the Western language, Aeshma was a demon of wrath, taking later a more distinct role, identified more like a demon of lust. For the second category, so talking about the ancient gods that later became demonized by other winning religions, or better, the quote-unquote, the old gods that became the new demons. Among these figures, we find a long list, especially from the Canaanite and the Phoenician pantheon, later being demonized when Judaism declared Yahweh as the only true and real God. So, for instance, one of the major figures of the Canaanite pantheon, called Baal, started to become known as Baal-Zebub, or the Lord of Flies. And of course, this Lord of Flies was an epithet to demonize in somehow the figure of Baal. Connected with Baal, we have the goddess Astarte, which was the goddess of love. She was the goddess of sex, war, and hunting. And she became known as the demon Astaroth. Other entities added to the list through the Old Testament, for instance, and related apocryphal texts, we find, for example, Belial, which appeared first as an epithet for something wicked, something out of the law. And from an epithet, it became more distinctively known as enemy of God in the Book of Enoch. And we also find some reference in the famous Dead Sea Scrolls. Another important milestone is the content of the collection of writings attributed to biblical figures, but not included in the canonical scriptures. And I'm talking, for example, about the famous Testament of Solomon. The Testament of Solomon was written in between the 1st and the 3rd century BC, where King Solomon receives the ability to control and command a list of demons by the power of a ring, the famous Ring of Solomon. And through this ring, through this power, actually King Solomon then will employ the demons, this list of demons, to help him to build the famous temple, the Temple of Solomon. This text basically blends elements of Jewish mysticism, magic, and theology, and it really would greatly influence later Christian and occult tradition concerning demonology and exorcism. Another important text that we find already, we are here within the Christian influence, and is the text written by Michael Psellus. Michael Psellus was a Byzantine Greek monk and a philosopher. He lived around 1000 BC, and he wrote this text called De Operatione Daemonum, or on the operations of demons, where he classified actually these demons, the spirits, into 6 categories. So we find the first, which are the Ineos, so basically related to fire. The second one are the aerial, so related to air. The third one are the terrestrial, so the earthly one. The fourth one are the aqueous, so related to water. The fifth is the subterranean, so underground. And he has another category, which is the heliophobic, so the one that are adverse to sunlight. So this group of texts has several others. Of course, we have many other, like for instance the hygromanthia. These texts are basically shaping the foundation of the spirits that we will find later in the common historical grimoires. Of course, the grimoires related to demonic evocation, like for instance the Key of Solomon, the Lemegeton with his Argoatia within, the Grimorium Verum, and many others. While for more detailed information about the descriptions and specific agency of the spirits, we have to wait until the Pseudomonarchia Daemonum of Johann Weyer in the late 1500s. Weyer was a Dutch medical doctor, and he was also a student of the famous Agrippa. Finally, it is with the Infernal Dictionary of Colin de Plancy, published first in the 1818 and later in the 1863, there we have the first depiction, the actual depiction of these demons, depiction that we find until our days. It is interesting to note how actually the iconography of this demon changed throughout the history, starting from the quote-unquote original Mesopotamian demons. They were actually mainly represented with bird feet, they were winged, and here you can see the strong relation that the Mesopotamia had between demons and wind. And then little by little, through the Judaism, through the Christianization, these figures started to change, and there were no more bird feet, but it started to change into hooves. Some demons lost their wings. So again, this we can see another process of Christianization, so the demonization of the pre-existing pagan gods, with special reference to Pan, the god that with the hooves, the spirit of nature, that became so much associated to the figure of the devil itself. So the devil with hooves, with the tail, which resemble pretty much the depiction of the god Pan. And here we come to the end of this first video about demons. I'm sure we will have more chances in the future to talk about demons and demonology, and also I'm planning also to make a video related to the exorcism itself as it's seen from the Catholic Church. But again, we will take it over in the next future. So thanks again for staying with me today. If you're not subscribed to the channel, please make sure to subscribe, and this will allow to be notified when new videos will come up. Thanks again, and I hope to see you again soon. Thank you.